A hot take. A piece of commentary typically produced quickly in response to a recent event whose primary purpose is to attract attention. I know hot takes are a part of the business. I know that part of the purpose of ESPN is to grab the attention. But with anything, there should be moderation, right? And there is a point to where we can go over the top with this kind of thing, right? Where hot take culture gets so extreme that it actually becomes counterproductive. Now, I'm sure there are many people out there in the TV world that will tell me that I don't know anything, but I'm not really speaking as Quincy Carrier, the YouTube content creator right now. I'm speaking as Quincy Carrier, a viewer of ESPN. Because this year, especially, it seems that ESPN, specifically ESPN, has jumped the shark. Because as much criticism I have doled out on FS1, and I believe justifiably so, on some of their main staple characters like Colin Cowherd and Jason Whitlock, they have not really been the problem. Colin Cowherd is not the guy making headlines for saying over-the-top things. ESPN has. FS1 isn't the hot take problem. It's ESPN, which is shocking because FS1 employs Colin Cowherd and Skip Bayless, two of the most early adopters of shock jock culture on television. But ESPN, on the other hand, has gone way over the top. And this week, I want to break that down. Now, before we start, I don't want to make this seem as if every show on ESPN has a hot take culture. That is not the case. There are plenty of shows like PTI, Around the Horn, Jalen Jacoby, and High Noon that provide very good sports talk with provocative and thought-provoking hosts and topics without having to go over the top. This problem mainly persists with ESPN's two flagship shows, Get Up and First Take. Now, you may ask, why those two shows in particular? Why are they the biggest culprits of this kind of stuff? Well, I believe that these shows have some elements that make them magnets for hot takes. Now, the first thing that contributes to this is that while First Take is mainly hosted by Stephen A. and Max Kellerman, and Get Up is anchored by Jalen Rose, Mike Greenberg, and Laura Rutledge, both shows have a healthy dose of what they call guest panelists to spice things up a bit. Now, why does this create an environment ripe for hot takes? One, when the show is hosted by the same two people, there just is simply less pressure for the talent on the show to feel the need to step out. And also, I feel like when you have a show and you host it every day, and it's yours and it has your name on it, there is more responsibility towards what you say because you're more accountable for it. But I'll get back to that later. But when you have this issue of a bunch of people needing to stand out who are all guest panelists, and these people are all from similar backgrounds, former or current beat reporter or former or current player / coach, there just isn't a lot of room for creativity with how a person can stand out, except for being absurd. It's what I like to call the Ryan Hollins effect. Since these guest panelists don't have a more consistent platform where they can form more nuanced and well-informed takes about a given subject, they resort to absurdity to gain attention, since absurdity, admittingly, is a great attention getter. And since they get so much attention, since they get so much engagement because of their absurdity, they receive positive feedback from that. So what happens now? Absurdity becomes that man or woman's go-to move, which becomes problematic because now every time they're on air, every time they're a guest panelist, they have this pressure to up the ante. And that pressure to up the ante every time they're on air is going to keep mounting and mounting until it reaches peak stupidity, which leads to moments like this.
Last year, we talked about the games that he ripped off. It was terrible teams. It matters who you play. You get vouched for that. Rex, I'm with you. And Daniel Jones is better
than Baker Mayfield?
Yep.
Daniel Jones is better than Baker Mayfield.
I said it, and I stand behind that.
Wow, that's what Swagger said.
Now, the second symptom of the Ryan Hollins effect is the complete lack of accountability that some of these analysts will have over the things they put out there, because ultimately, It's not their show. They don't have their name on it. They don't have to come back and answer for things for weeks to come on a daily basis if they're wrong about something absurd they said. And ultimately, they don't have to be as responsible about what comes out their mouth as other people. They're not held as accountable because it's not their show. Why do you think a guy like Colin Cowherd in the first 3 weeks of the season wasn't making these ridiculous headlines? Why do you think it's guys like Rex Ryan and Marcus Spears who are sounding off and saying ridiculous things? Because those two guys don't have a daily national show where they have to answer for their absurdity like Colin Cowherd would. Colin Cowherd has to be responsible for what comes out of his mouth, so he is more measured with the silly stuff that he says. Marcus Spears and Rex Ryan, they're just on Get Up or First Take whenever the producers want them to be, so their responsibility is a little more laissez-faire, which is a problem because now these guys, Marcus Spears and Rex Ryan, have all the benefit of having a platform for their hot take that generally an established personality would have for having a show and credibility and also ultimately having to be responsible for what they say. They have that same platform for their hot take without having to deal with the responsibility of having that big of a platform. It's like if you go to a party at somebody else's house and they bought all the drinks and you're just getting wild, you're jumping around, your favorite song comes on, you're dancing, you got your shirt off, you're on somebody's table, you're having fun, and you ain't worried about nothing because it ain't your house. But if that party was at your house and those drinks were bought with your money, you're not gonna be dude out there with shirt off celebrating because you know at the end of the day it's your responsibility to pick up the garbage that these people leave around. So you're gonna have to be a bit more responsible with how you handle yourself. That is what you got going on at ESPN. You have a lot of dudes at the party trying to stand out, so they're on the kitchen table with their shirt off saying wild things without having to worry about being accountable for what they say. Now, I wouldn't sit here and make this video if my only problem was that I personally don't like hot takes. I've not liked hot takes for a while now. I made this show because I don't like hot takes. That's not why I'm making this video. My problem with hot take culture is that it creates a lane and normalizes two things: absurdity and just straight up lying. Anybody who's been on Twitter knows that absurdity is synonymous with any kind of sports talk on that platform, Twitter in particular. It's a place where not only it's a beautiful place where not only Stephen A can drop a hot take, but anybody can drop a hot take and possibly get attention. It's a place where absurdity, admittedly, thrives and where there is literally not enough space for a nuanced thought. So when ESPN does nothing but add fuel to the fire with hot takes after hot takes, it creates a vat of just extreme opinions out there in the public because ultimately ESPN speaks to most sports fans. Most people who think or talk about sports get their opinions from the shows that are on ESPN. And if all of those opinions are extreme in one way or the other, it creates this toxic vat of extreme opinions. Since these extreme opinions are normalized because of the sheer volume of people who are willing to emulate ESPN, these things start to become accepted knowledge. It's impossible to talk about a guy like Lamar Jackson or Baker Mayfield in a critical but fair way without being bombarded by people who just accept the things that ESPN tells them. Either somebody has to be the next insert legend here, or they have to be a top 5 all-time bust. Either they have absolutely no flaws as a player, or because of one flaw, they are deemed garbage. In today's toxic sports talk environment, a young quarterback is either Patrick Mahomes or Jamarcus Russell. A new head coach is either Sean McVay or Hugh Jackson after 3 games. And this is the kind of environment that does affect the enjoyment that fans have over the game, because it's unavoidable. There are so many people who are willing to go there, who are willing to be extreme, who are willing to be super emotional and repeat the things or repeat the narratives that ESPN throws out there without really giving them thought. And because it has molded a large enough portion of the fan base, it actually can mount unbearable pressure on some owners to get rid of a coach or bench a quarterback after very little time. It's honestly the sports version of cancel culture. Think about that. Okay, so I'm a Browns fan. I obviously have bias when talking about the Browns, but I always make sure to counterbalance that bias with facts, stats, and things that are easily able to be looked up and confirmed. If I'm talking about somebody's character and inferring something, I'm inferring that from a quote and not just inferring that from an emotion that people feel about that particular player. Now, why do I bring this up? Because when it comes to ESPN, there are people who are willing to infer things about somebody's character without having a quote or something factual to back them up. Sometimes it's easy for us to get carried away and believe things about players or believe certain attitudes that players have just by inferring them based on what everybody else in the media says, right? And it's easier when that opinion or that inference of somebody matches kind of what you already believe about that person. But sometimes these things could not be more wrong and more false and unfair to people. The narrative I want you guys to think about is the narrative that Baker Mayfield ran his mouth all summer about how the Browns were going to be so good before the season. That is a narrative we all remember happening. That is a narrative that has been brought up when the Browns started 1-2. And that is a narrative that people generally believe is true, but it's complete garbage. Now, again, I'm a Browns fan. Obviously, I'm biased. Obviously, I want to protect Baker Mayfield. But again, counterbalancing bias with some facts. Show me the Baker Mayfield quote where he said the Browns were going to go 12-4. Show me the Baker Mayfield quote where he said the Browns were going to run this league. Any quote that you could find of Baker Mayfield being disrespectful to another player. If you go back and look through Baker Mayfield's quote, the only quote that you could find that's even on that line is the one where he was misquoted about Daniel Jones, where it made it seem like he was kind of making fun of the fact that Daniel Jones got drafted 12 when that wasn't the case. Again, you can look that up yourself. But nonetheless, everybody took their emotions, took their feelings about Baker Mayfield and formed them into this narrative that he was talking trash all summer without having a single quote to back that up. Here is what happened. The Browns traded for Odell Beckham. People on ESPN got excited about the Browns and had hot takes about how good the Browns will be. Then people reacted to those hot takes. Odell does an interview saying that he wants to be something great like the Patriots. Hot takes again persist because people don't like Odell and people do like Odell. Now, in order to justify being mad at Odell for a fairly innocent quote, some hot takers who already don't like OBJ force in some of the aspects of OBJ's personality into that quote and start inferring things about that quote that just weren't there when he said it. Which then leads to inserting their own feelings about players associated with that player. One of those players associated with OBJ, obviously Baker Mayfield. Now, Baker Mayfield has a reputation as a guy who is a gunslinger and a guy who says what's on his mind, but he is never somebody who is disrespectful to other teams in the NFL and talked about how they're going to run the league. If anything, he said the same thing Freddie Kitchens said, which is, we haven't won nothing. We went 7-8-1 last year. Since there are people who don't like Baker Mayfield, don't like how he lives his life, they are going to infer certain things about him and just attach on a narrative that is completely false, like Baker Mayfield ran his mouth all offseason. This is not true. You cannot find the absurd Baker Mayfield overconfident quote, because if you did, they would have been blasted on the airways for the last 3 weeks. But somehow people on ESPN have found a way to hold a guy like Baker Mayfield responsible for hot takes that ESPN made up. Do you see how this ruins sports talk? When hot takes are using other hot takes as the factual basis for their hot take, it just gets ridiculous. That means that we have jumped the shark, and that is why ESPN has a serious hot take problem. That is it for this week's video. Let me know what your thoughts are. Do you think ESPN is the main culprit in the hot take problem, or do you think it's more spread out and more nuanced than that? Let me know your opinions down below. But thank you guys for watching. If you like what I do here, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, ding that notification bell so you can be notified when I upload. And if you want to help this show out, donate some money, please give to the Patreon, $1 a month, get your name on the bottom of this video. And if you want to buy some merch, that is also greatly appreciated. But that is it for this week's video. Thank you guys for watching. Have a great day. Have a good night.